The battle between man and monster rarely involves two entities, but one. Griffith as a victim is something I'm sure you've all heard before in the horrendous Griffith did nothing wrong way, or by actually intelligent people analysing his character downfall and what drove him to sacrifice the band. I will do my best to analyse him through this perspective of being a victim, as I feel people fail to see all factors that created this demonic god. Let me just state here that following his actions after ascending to godhood, to Casca primarily, but also Guts and the rest of the world, is nothing short of unforgivable evil, and the result of a monster with a complexion of utter disregard for humanity, serving his own ideals and darkest wishes. You can keep whatever utilitarian ideologies you have and stuff them up your ass. Femto is evil, a frozen heart serving only himself, regardless if humanity is thriving as of recent. But human Griffith is undoubtedly one of the most complex beings within Manga itself. His entire character is a continual struggle between man and monster, coddled, guided, and manipulated by the cold, rigid hands of the ones beyond. Fate in Berserk is not as straightforward as everyone seems to believe. As stated by Slan during the Eclipse, there are things even those blessed with divine powers cannot foresee. However, this is purely due to the fact another divinely powerful force in Skull Knight is opposing them. Most of Guts' character deals with rebelling against fate, him being a sacrifice destined to die from demon kind. A line commonly associated with the canon of Berserk, despite not being such, is "You are not a victim of fate." In a book written by Quentin Boton, which accurately identifies what makes Guts so special of a character. However, the way I see it, Guts is not a victim of fate, as he simply does not matter to it anymore. Or, more accurately, as of chapter 378, if he was to die, he'd simply die like a worm plucked by a bird. Another way of saying it is that fighting the fallout of causality's climax is not what makes him a victim of it, just the victim of another's choices. Denying the offer from the God Hand is still technically an option, as shown from the count, so it was indeed Griffith's desires that Guts is a victim of. Griffith, however, was a central beacon of which fate attached itself to, manipulating the events and people he would meet, specifically attuned to furthering Griffith as a person. Guts' literal life clearly didn't matter to Griffith's ascension. The only requirement needed from Guts was to be in the position to mean a lot to Griffith to be able to condemn him. The true victim of fate, as I see it, is Griffith. We lost a human life, and a demon was spat back out. Relying on chapter 83 to further my argument may be the losing blunder to some, considering its lack of canonity, but I wish to discuss Miura's original intentions regardless. The idea of evil in Berserk is a concept that involves humanity desiring reasons for suffering, so this being, also known as God, manifested. The idea of evil resides in the astral plane, controlling the very strings and influencing events to have everything in the proper place for the proper time, meaning Griffith's life was controlled by this otherworldly presence, as Berserk offers the ideology that free will is merely a facade and determinism is the reigning ruler of this world. The being claims all humans are connected and all have darkness within them, and that is God. It is a bleak conversation between the two and practically confirms that the world is just an evil cesspit with no point of a strong moral attitude. The reason this is important is due to us attacking Griffith's character with a moral sense of justice, established in our own modern world with laws, rules, and ethical expectations. This isn't the world Griffith lives in. Griffith, who was chosen in a distant past to be in this position, simply went along through with his own desire, until he found himself at a place of contention. He is being pushed to do as he will by these incredibly powerful entities, serenaded with a justification for the greater good of himself, to the point Griffith as a victim becomes a lot more understandable to me, as his own autonomy in the decision is nearly completely removed. Once again though, Miura removes this chapter for revealing too much early on, and limiting him in the future for explanations. The God Hand are like parasites, infesting themselves into the ears of the vulnerable, whispering odd promises of power, rebirth, and revenge. From the very start of Griffith's life, he was ordained by them as the king to come, and by controlling causality from the shadows allowed him to be in place of severe mental turmoil. Griffith was someone who was widely unknown truly by those who worshipped his leadership and chivalry. He had all the aspects of a prince apart from that noble birth. A beautiful, well-spoken, charismatic, and ambitious leader. This is how everyone saw him. Everyone apart from Guts, the one man who challenged his unmatched aura, unenchanted initially by the beauty of Griffith's purpose, but spellbound by the warmth of his friendship. Guts was many things to Griffith. At worst, a puppet, a soldier he could rely on, and at best, a friend. Griffith's speech to Charlotte was dramatic, however it also contained some rather questionable aspects. The man who claimed living for no reason is something he could never abide by makes sense for his ambition. However, the definition of a friend to him is where I garner suspicion. He claims this equal would be compelled by nobody else, and would oppose anyone who would trample his dream, body and soul, even if that person was Griffith. Ironically, this is indeed what Guts becomes, following the Eclipse, primarily after the conviction arc as well, with the journey to Casca's healing. But the Guts of the Golden Age is nothing like this fancy description Griffith casually entrances Charlotte with. The entire reason Guts leaves is to pursue his own dream, to fit the qualities Griffith described, in order to be his friend, unknowing he was already Griffith's only friend in the entire world. So, this moonlight description is a facade. He falls under the spell of friendship with Guts, risks his life for him, relies on his counsel, his emotional feedback, all whilst Guts is following and compelled by Griffith's dream. And when his only true friend left, due to his own words, chaos was the replacement and death was the price. As Griffith is sacrificing Guts, he goes over how Guts was the only one in tens of thousands to make him forget his dream, showing the utter dazzling quality of Guts' friendship to Griffith and the fact that Griffith was not a complete psychopath, unable to feel these warm emotions to another. Griffith was most likely asexual. From what I gathered, he was not possessed by a lust at any given time, no thought of sexual desire or romantic intimacy, apart from the singular time in his deranged fantasy with Casca being his wife. However, his mental state at this point is something we shall discuss later. Griffith did use sex to benefit his own needs, however. Sleeping with Gannon was nothing more than a tactical decision to protect the lives of his soldiers after being moved by the death of a young boy holding a toy knight. If anything, this shows what a stable and healthy version of himself would choose. Instead of sacrificing his own soldiers, he chose to sacrifice himself.
I don't regret, I don't feel guilty, but I'd rather sacrifice myself than watch any more innocent children die in the name of my dream.
Stop it!
Despite him claiming that the boy's death was not the central motivation, during the moment in which they found him, Griffith felt things such as guilt, sadness, loss, and Casca comments how Griffith was the single person in the entire band to remember the boy. He did love his soldiers, possibly the monster loved commanding them, and the man loved inspiring them. But to Griffith, they were never nameless numbers to send forth to doom, which is why sacrificing them all was the price to pay, as you have to lose a part of yourself, as ordained by the God Hand in the Black Swordsman arc. He next used sex to assert dominance and control over someone, along with eradicating his loss of purpose following Guts' departure. The duel and Guts leaving was undoubtedly the start of the end for Griffith, whose mental fortitude is shattered in one swing of swords. Unbound by logic and needing to re-establish himself, he forced himself onto Charlotte, knowing her submissive infatuation with Griffith would prove an easy task. There is no love, no romantic desire, or even lust for her body, I'd argue. During and after, Griffith is depicted as shaken, unraveling, and broken from Guts. It is clear he used the sex as a power play, dominating a weak person due to his narcissistic love or even need for control. For a realistic comparison, it's like getting smashed so hard in a ranked match, You make a new account and dunk on low-level players to feel good about your incompetent skills. It certainly painted a darker Griffith who seems to need validation of any sort to remain stable. So why is this important? Well, this is what the God Hand and fate itself preys upon when Griffith is locked up, withering away, tortured for over a year, a festering hatred for Guts building up slowly. Griffith was steamrolling his way into nobility, and with no one to stop him, as he was simply smarter, more ambitious and gleaming than any who would oppose him. However, deep down he knew it was his own fault. His emotions in that cell are a confused sack of despair. Love for Guts remains, along with a desire to get it all back. When the visits of the spirits announces the God Hand's approach, this change brews sinisterly below. We have to imagine ourselves in his position. Whilst Griffith was never someone to express his emotions so vividly, it is clear he has them. His guilt for the death of the boy, his self-loathing in the lake as he attempts to wash himself clean, his friendly love for Guts, obsessing so much over the warmth this man gives him that his path is changed for good. And now, in the darkness of solitude, a shell of his former self, battered, sliced, mutilated and ruined, he has lost it all. The requirement for the Behelit to activate is for the person to be at their lowest possible place, mentally and physically, which is also the most ripe for negative emotions, contempt, hate and longing. Griffith is not quite there yet during imprisonment, as there is always the hope he can escape and reunite with his comrades. But after the events of Wild, it is clear his cell was not the thing keeping him locked away. It was his withered body, making him a cripple in both movement and speech. Imagine the one thing you live for, the beautiful ideal you have dreamed of for so long, being so suddenly snatched from you, and then being the blade that slices into you for over a year. When you finally escape, it becomes clear that you are nothing more than a nuisance, and you will never lead men to battle, never wield sword or shield, occupy the songs of legend, or rule the kingdom you so very much needed. It would be shattering for anyone. He becomes spiteful, jealous of Guts and Casca's relationship. He used to control both of them in either palm, and now they frolic with each other, content with the other's presence. Guts's autonomy and power looms over Griffith's own lack of, and attempts to use sexual manipulation once more on Casca to re-establish his control over the woman who once worshipped the very ground he stepped on. But in his state, only pity befalls him, and Casca doesn't even realize what he's attempting. When he sees a vision of his former self, standing proud and strong, possibly from the God Hand, he races off, chasing that undying dream. Referring back to the deranged fantasy I mentioned earlier, Griffith momentarily lives a life of peaceful recluse, apparently married to Casca. Whilst many valid interpretations exist, I believe this is a hellish torture, perhaps sent from the God Hand or idea of evil due to the presence of the Behelit. As for Griffith, a crippled mute relying solely on the woman who fell in love with another man, and their child could be nothing further from the life, character, and person he used to be. This hallucination of if Griffith swallowed his pride and settled for the death of his dream is not the other choice, but to me, one he'd rather die than accept. Sure, he says this peace and quiet isn't so bad, but his face is painted with despair and misery the entire time, disconnected from Casca and attached to the memories. This empty existence is a step closer to solidifying Griffith's resolve, descending into true madness in the shallow lake, laughing at the hilarity of it all. That noble Griffith is gone, the dream is dead, and he attempts to end his suffering, launching his neck at a sharp tree stump. The final part of Griffith's downfall, along with my main point surrounding his damnable final decision, is the explosion of hell from the Eclipse after the Behelit is activated with Griffith's blood. The horrific atmosphere is overwhelming for all of them, and the parasites begin bewitching Griffith further with his dream, sparking the thing he just gave up. The younger impression of Griffith monologues, convincing himself that all the blood spilt, lives lost, dreams swallowed by his, is all for a greater purpose. What is the point in apologizing now? Why give up? Everything he has done has deemed it impossible to surrender to the world beating down upon him. If he repents, he loses, and as he carries the young boy up the mountain of corpses to the summit of his ambition, Griffith's dream is reborn. At his most emotionally broken state, Griffith is promised revival, power hitherto unseen, wings he can soar the limits of his ambition. The only catch, the sacrifice of the remaining members of his army. The choice may seem inherently and unquestionably selfish, killing people devoted to you for power. But when you truly encompass all aspects of Griffith's life to this stage, it becomes trickier to condemn him as pure evil. By now he was disillusioned with humanity, tortured mentally and physically, and at a dead end for his ambition. Supernatural beings are promising him immense power, whispering into his ear to do it, warm temptations contrasting the freezing state he found himself in moments before. The majority of us view his choice as healthy, emotionally stable beings who have never been in a position of nobility, controlling thousands of troops, pursuing an entire kingdom. I also believe Miura wanted to evoke a certain sympathy for Griffith as a tragic character during his human life, which is why he drew him as a child to represent his emotions and stability being immature and less logical. Fate, mixed with causality, had determined that Griffith would not reject the God Hand's offer, which whilst was a possibility, and the God Hand would not have dragged him to hell like the Count due to him not being of demon kind, didn't align with Griffith's own desires for power and control. His personality was ultimately his undoing. Perhaps a perfectly ethical person would have sacrificed themselves, as Griffith rejecting the God Hand would most likely result in his death later on, being fatally weak and incapable. So, if you cannot go backwards, you go forwards. Bury everything to revive that dream. These people joined your dream, leeching off your shining brightness. He did not force them. They should be honored to die for him, regardless of who commands the executioner. This is the angle the God Hand uses, and it does have convincing undertones given the context, and Griffith's final glance at Guts shows that he finds no happiness, no jubilee, no excitement with dooming them all. It was just something he had to do to win. I do not consider this act from Griffith pure evil. Hell no. Obviously what follows is, but this was simply the tormented man's last attempt of survival. Was it selfish? Sure, when looking at it purely as Griffith plus sacrificing everyone equals Griffith evil. But once again, I think it is a natural choice in that exact context that is orchestrated to indeed be a natural choice. Irresistible promises about your life's devotion, alongside fate itself placing you in this exact position ordained potentially centuries ago. A physically and mentally stable Griffith would never sacrifice them all, as destiny needed him to be at the worst possible state. A lot of people consider Griffith to be purely evil from the get-go, which I never understood, following the severe emotional struggle he is shown to go through during the Golden Age. He asks Guts if he thinks he's cruel, questioning his own cold nature to the lives of those he's indifferent in ending. And of course, he has moments that promote this agenda he is evil, such as his sadistic smiles, treatment of the Queen and Minister Foss, and general disregard for feelings of intimacy towards others. But this was never some cruel villain, such as Gambino or Wilde. I'm defending him from the demonization he receives, but that is only because no human is entirely black or white. Griffith was a victim of fate. Femto is a spawn of evil. They are not the same, and I am so tired of seeing people saying they are. Femto is Griffith severely altered, without weakness, which for him was emotional attachment to humanity, such as guilt, regret, desire, self-loathing, perception of boundaries. Femto is an expression of his darkest moments in the Golden Age, but the sacrificial choice was indeed made by a human. When analysing a character, you have to know who they are. And who was Griffith? The blazing inferno who swallowed entire battalions with pure devotion to his dream, one most surrendered to the lost memories of childhood fantasy. Griffith murdered, schemed, manipulated, sacrificed, and grasped what he wanted from the very beginning. He took Guts by the sword, Charlotte by his charisma, disposed of the Queen and her underlings through counterplotting. The signs of the monster were there from the very beginning. There is no shock that he chose to dispose of the Hawks once they could no longer carry him to his dream. as the man within had all but perished from his torture. The dream is what brought the Hawks to him initially, and unfortunately, none but Guts surpassed the dream. A year of torture had warped Griffith to feel hate for Guts, however, and therefore even he fell by the wayside of his dream. Overall, I do believe human Griffith was a victim and made a choice that we as readers can condemn as selfish and unthinkable. However, I hope this video has provided at least a little context to his choice for anyone who may have forgotten just how consequential the stacking circumstances of his existence were towards the final decision. Your whole argument after watching this may be, I know why he did it, but that doesn't mean it was okay, and I would be inclined to just keel back and accept that as a valid rebuttal. However, at least you know the context of the choice, as it was never an on-the-whim betrayal, but years of building blocks were placed even before his birth to arrange this great event. His desire or lack of care is what we can condemn, but then again, to sacrifice someone, it requires losing a part of yourself in the process, and it took plenty of horrifying visions to finally convince him. He was not malicious nor backstabbing in this process, but saw it as a necessary step for the fallen troops prior. He just did as he willed, as you cannot will what you will. Anyways, it's still fuck Griffith.
Do you understand? If they see him, shoot him on sight no matter where the fuck he is.
Until the next one, peace out.